So let me open up a word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Thank you, Lord, for this day and for allowing us to be here to serve the citizens of Georgia, and just pray that you guide us with your wisdom today, and pray that all we do would honor you. In your name we pray, amen. All right, I'm going to start with Chairman Hitchens. If you'll come up and tell us about House Bill 1233. Here, Mon, I can reach you.
That's just a brief notice why. First, I appreciate you hearing on such short notice. I just got the bill the other day, but it's House Bill 1233 LC 472562. And I'll go into the background about why, which you all have here. But what happened is a couple of years ago there was a lawsuit in Cobb County. It was Cobb County versus, I gave you all the information, Bell Cell Telecommunications. And what they said there was that Cobb County couldn't go outside their jurisdiction and charge fees for 911 services. And so that discontinued it. And what my bill does is I represent the city of Port Wentworth, and now they've been sued for $3.5 million because they provide fire service for people outside their municipality. Well, their municipality is located in such an area that the county can't provide fire service there. So the people are willing to, the individuals and the companies there. Port Wentworth is right adjacent to the Port of Savannah, and they have a very good fire department, because they also serve the Port of Savannah. And so they, what this bill does is it changes it so that municipalities and counties can accept fees for services, and it doesn't require it to be a tax, because you can't tax people outside your government entity. And that's essentially the bill.
So the local government that's being served would pay a fee.
Well, they've charged fees in the past for fire service, but a group of attorneys from St. Simon's is suing 4 or 5 different municipalities for accepting fees for fire service, when the Supreme Court has said in the case in telecommunications, Bell Cell Telecommunications in Cobb County, that they can't accept fees. I think there's a difference of opinion with regard to whether the circumstances are the same in each case, but just to satisfy my constituents, we've introduced this bill, and Mr. Morelli has done it. He lived in that area. He's very familiar with the area and what transpires here.
All right. Do we have any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Do we have anybody sign up for this one, or you don't know yet?
And it's a voluntary contribution. They don't have to. I mean, it's a contract between the individual or company and the city. So.
We're checking the sign-up sheet to see if anybody wants to speak to it. All right. Doesn't look like we have any public testimony at this time. I do see some of our committee lights blinking now. Chairman Saines.
I just see the tower is branded there. Where is it clear that it's, it might be in code, but what, could you clarify it being an optional arrangement for the individual or business?
Well, they don't have to contract, number one. I mean, they don't, it's not like a tax where you're going to be required to pay it, but it says the governing body of each county or municipality of the state shall have the power, both within and without its boundaries, to levy and collect any tax or fee as may be necessary to carry out this article. So if they don't solicit the service, they don't have to pay. They have to solicit. They don't They don't in any form try and make people be a party to this.
Representative Bernal.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hitchens, where, the money that's, collected in the fees, where does that go
It
to?
goes into this, in this case, it goes into the city of Port Wentworth to subsidize their fire department.
Okay.
That's providing the service.
Oh, they don't have enough money right now to,
Well, they have to service the Georgia Ports Authority, and they get no financial, return on that investment. I mean, and, you know, that's a significant area with a lot of equipment, a lot of buildings, and they have a pretty substantial fire department that they have to fund on their own. So this helps them somewhat. They spend a lot of money themselves, their tax money on fire issues, fire equipment.
okay, so this is kind of like Clayton County with the,
Airport,
Hartsville. We do all the services, but we don't get any money.
well, they can't require the port to pay anything. It's a government entity.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, what's the will of the committee on House Bill 1233? We have a move to pass. Do we have a second? A second. All in favor? Well, first, any discussion? I don't hear any. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. All right,
Thank you.
it moves. Thank you. All right, next, Chairman Buddy Deloach, you ready for yours? Wherever you're more comfortable is fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This is House Bill 1370. The LC is 472707. Very short, easy to read. When we did Senate Bill 202, the Election Integrity Committee heard testimony about long waits at election lines and that sort of thing, and in order to address that, we did a number of things. One of those is for statewide general elections, we required that there be one ballot marking device for every 250 registered electors in each precinct. That didn't take into consideration early voters, absentee voters, or anything else. We did some other things in there which remain in the code, which one of those is if you have a wait over 30 minutes. The next election, you have to adjust and provide for additional machines, and there's some other measures that addressed waiting lines. I've heard ever since the day that bill passed from election officials and others that they wanted to be able to take into consideration the number of early voters and absentee voters. But if you look at the current language in the statute, it gives those local election officials, superintendents, the right to take into consideration early voting and whatever other factors may influence the number of voting machines needed, and they can make a decision based on that, on their own, the number of machines that they will provide, except in statewide general elections. And what this bill does is simply make statewide general elections, as far as number of machines required, the same as for all other elections in the state of Georgia. And that's the bill.
Mr. Chairman, don't you have a letter of support?
I do.
From, tell us the group that sent you that letter of support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is from the Georgia Association of Voter Registration and Election Officials, and I'm led to believe that every single election official in the state of Georgia supports this legislation, and I know I've heard from an awful lot of them over the past 2 years. Actually, I've had many requests for this legislation.
It sounds like it's a common sense measure.
It is, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I talked to the those that served on the Election Integrity Committee about why we did this for this one particular election and no other, nobody could really remember, except we were just trying to respond to that concern about waiting lines, and that concern doesn't seem to exist now.
All right, we have a couple of questions. I'll start with Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I served on the election committee
Yes,
for
ma'am.
SB 202, so I'm real familiar with how things were kind of rammed down our throats. But so are we saying now that we're giving that authority back to the election officials? Because there are some places that do still have long lines. So are we saying that if that day they have long lines, they can make different decisions? Is that what you're saying in your bill?
No, yeah, I'm saying that they have the authority, and what it actually says in this code section, if you read where we're eliminating for all other elections.
What lines are those exactly?
If you go to line 20,
Thank you.
you will find what is the existing language, and it says for all other elections, the superintendent may provide a greater or lesser number of voting booths or enclosures if, after a thorough consideration of the type of election, expected turnout, number of electors who've already voted by advance or absentee, and other relevant factors that inform the appropriate amount of equipment needed, such superintendent determines that a different amount of equipment is needed or sufficient.
So
That's in the existing code, and that will remain. It just takes the one election that we took out to treat separately and removes that exception.
one more question.
Yes,
so where I vote at, one of those times we had long lines and they didn't have enough machines that particular day. So then for the next hour or the next day, can they bring in extra machines? Are you saying now they
Are you
have the
talking about
authority
you
to do
waited
that
for early voting?
for early voting?
There certainly would. There wouldn't be anything to prevent them from doing that. But in the existing code, if on election day you have those long waiting lines, the next election they're required to have more.
Okay, but what are we doing to eliminate the long lines completely? That's what I'm trying to understand.
You have to talk to your local election officials about that. They control that.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions from the committee before we hear from public comment? All right, I don't see any. So let's go to Miss Cindy Battles. You in here? If you'll come up, and we're going to limit the public testimony to 2 minutes. We have a lot of bills, and it's getting late.
I don't even know if I need 2 minutes.
All right.
We'll see. Hi, everybody. As all of you know, my name is Cindy Battles. I am the Policy and Engagement Director with the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to talk about HB 1370. I think my problem with this, and I've said this when SB 202 passed, this is sort of like, it's not a solution, it's a shortcut. And one of the reasons election officials need it is because we're still under-resourced in counties. I don't have a particular problem with election officials being able to subtract the number of people who voted early. My problem is with expected turnout and other relevant factors, because I don't know what that means, and I think it's open to interpretation. If anybody remembers 2018, election officials prepared for a 40% turnout, and we had a 60% turnout, and you had lines 8+ hours long, even in rural counties. So I think that's where my problem comes into this. We keep doing things where we pass unfunded mandates and election officials need help, and instead of giving them that help, we're kind of doing something that could disenfranchise voters. So I think if we could just take out the expected turnout and other relevant factors, I wouldn't have a problem with this. Also, I don't know if y'all are aware or not, but because the language says voting booth instead of voting machine, one of the things that election officials will do is they'll set up a table for provisional ballots, and they'll call that a voting booth. So there's already a decrease in the number of voting machines that we have here because of the language in the bill being used as a shortcut. So again, I think those are the two things that I would like to see changed, and then we could come support the bill. But other than that, I would ask y'all to respectfully vote do not pass for this legislation.
Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. And good job on the time. It looks like our bill sponsor wants to comment.
Mr. Chairman, I would just point out that this language about that she objected to is in the existing law. That's not anything we're changing in the bill.
Yes, sir. I understand. I actually testified to the same thing when this law was changed to reflect this. So.
And, Mr. Chairman, I don't think there's any unfunded mandate in this bill. I think you're giving more flexibility, right, to the,
That is correct, and the idea is these local election officials, so that will save them money. What many of them are doing now when they have to have these additional marking devices, they're able to borrow some from the state now, but that time's going to run out, and as we continue to require them in some precincts where as many as 60 or 65 people, percentage of the voters have voted early.
okay.
I actually didn't call this an unfunded mandate. I said that the Georgia Assembly has passed a number of unfunded mandates, and I've been collecting budgets from county officials showing how their election costs are steadily going up, both because of the cost of running elections and the number of increased voters.
But this one is not an unfunded mandate.
Right. It's
Okay.
but it's a shortcut, not a solution to the fact that they are under-resourced.
Thank you for your testimony.
You're very welcome.
Next, we have Todd Edwards with ACCG. Two minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Todd Edwards, again with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. And it brings me great pleasure to come before this committee and urge your favorable support and consideration for a piece of election legislation. It would definitely, with a lot of folks voting early, voting absentee, it leaves it up to each election superintendent under these pretty strict circumstances to deploy less machines when they feel it's not needed or necessary to get the job done. We think that's it helps save, be effective, efficient, make the highest, best use of limited county resources. I believe that there was a question earlier if there were long lines at a place. I wanted to point out section 21.2.263. If it turns out that if a previous election, a general election, a precinct contained more than 2,000 electors, and if all those electors desiring to vote had not completed voting 1 hour following the closing of time, then after then we would have to add more machines. So it's all based on previous elections experience, the amount of early voters, the amount of absentee voters. I think those decisions can be made at the local level. We thank you for this bill, Representative Deloach, and we urge your favorable consideration.
All right. Looks like we have one question from Representative Bernal.
Yes, so you're saying, for the speaker, thank you. So you're saying that they have to stand in line for a period of time and get to the time that it's closing, and then you can make a decision to add more machines?
Not presently at the next election. They can either reduce the size of the precinct so that it shall contain, and this is at the precinct level, no more than 2,000 electors in accordance with the procedures prescribed. So they would be forced to reduce the precinct.
But my question still is that on that day, if there are lots of people that are standing in line, we still don't have anything where they can bring in other voting machines. They have to keep waiting to the next election.
I think wouldn't that currently be the case if they're got a particularly busy precinct, if there are too many people waiting in line late, that situation would still occur where they would have to react somehow. not by law, but just to accommodate the electors, and that would happen whether or not this legislation was passed.
But I guess my problem is why we have to wait to the next election to add more machines. Why can't that be their decision, that if there are it appears that a lot of people decide to go and vote at that particular time, that they have to wait to the next year to add?
There's nothing that prohibits that in this bill or current law.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you.
I don't see any more questions from the committee. What is the will of the committee?
Move to pass.
We have a motion to move. Any second? Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Hold on. We may have some discussion. Okay, wave. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Okay, I believe the ayes have it. All right. Next, Representative Houston Gaines. House Bill 1359.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1359, in my opinion, is a common sense measure that would address issues that we've seen where you have certain local governments that are not enforcing their own laws or would ever consider not enforcing their own laws. This is preemptive to make sure that our local governments in this state enforce their own laws, and frankly, we're going to hit them where it hurts in the pocketbook, because that's, if you want to make local governments enforce the laws that are on the books, I think that's a good way to do it, to make sure that if a citizen who owns property in a community where that government, whether it's county, municipality, or consolidated government, is following a policy or pattern of not enforcing their own laws or ordinances, and on lines 22 through 28, you can see the full list of existing laws that we're intending to include in this bill, including the sanctuary city policy that we have in Georgia to make sure that local governments do not operate as sanctuary cities. And we've added Code Section 42414 that requires if a sheriff has an individual who is in the country illegally in their jail, they have to notify to the federal government. That's already in state law, but what we found is some folks are not complying with that. And obviously, we've seen here over the last 5 days just the devastating consequences of local governments and the federal government not doing its job, not enforcing the laws. The federal government obviously has totally failed when it comes to our southern border. We've seen that repeatedly. But I live in Athens. In Athens, Clark County, our local government has failed as well. And, frankly, there are things that could have been done and should have been done over many years that unfortunately resulted in just absolute tragedy in our community last week. And, I don't really want to bring that into this discussion. This bill was dropped prior to that. And really on that issue, the number one thing we can do is pray for Lake and Riley's family and the Athens community. But I do want to say that this bill, again, was introduced prior to that, and it would address local governments and sheriffs that are creating sanctuary policies or that are failing to report to federal authorities as required by state law already, but we're finding that has not occurred. So in local governments, in places where local governments aren't doing that, then a citizen in those communities would be able to file for a property tax refund for the amount of value lost on their property is one option. Or if they had to incur expenses as a result of their local government not doing their job, let's say putting up fencing or cameras to secure their property because their local government's not doing its job, then those two a property owner would have the ability to seek a reduction, a refund on their property taxes in the amount of a reduction in the fair market value or the reasonable expenses that they actually incurred. And so that's what the bill does, I'll briefly just go to the last page on how this would actually operate, lines 43 through 46. There's already a provision in law that if like a taxpayer overpays their property taxes, that local governments have to set up a mechanism to address that. So this would leave it to the local government to set up a process where a property owner would have the ability to seek that refund. Any decision made by that, however, would be appealable to the Superior Court. There are some just clear, lines 47 to 53 really just some clarifying language, and then lines 54 to 56, again, kind of towards the end, is just clarifying language. One of the things that is different about this substitute versus the original bill is making it clear that if you're a city, if a city's not enforcing its own laws, then the county would not be liable for decisions of the city and vice versa. That was something that was brought to us that we wanted to make sure we included. And then also adding that language on line 28 about requiring sheriffs to comply with Code Section 42.4.14, which is ensuring that they're notifying federal authorities if you have someone in your jail that is not in the country legally. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I know there's some folks, in particular Brian Norman. At some point, if appropriate, might have him come up and join. He's with the Goldwater Institute and has helped us with some of this as well. And but, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take some questions, or we can hear from folks, however you want to handle it.
Okay, come on up, Mr. Norman, and Representative Gaines, do you want him to go ahead and
Sure.
speak to the bill, or want to take some questions first?
Either way, I defer to you. I
Okay.
know we're late. So,
All right, we have several questions. Let's take some questions. That might give you more to respond to. So we'll start with Representative Olalier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rep. Gaines, thank you for bringing this bill. I've got quite a few questions. I'll just start with, how would you determine causality between a drop in one's property value to a sanctuary city designation, or, if one individual was panhandling near the home, would that constitute a grievance that someone can bring to the city for a refund in that value?
Sure. So one of the things that kind of to that question, and Brian may have additional thoughts to add, but on lines 48 to 50, it does ensure that a decision of whether it's a prosecutor or of an individual law enforcement officer would not determine this policy. It is a clear practice or policy of that local government to simply not enforce the laws that they have or that the state has, and that's where this would apply.
And just so that I'm clear, any resident, so it could be 100,000 plus residents in a city that currently has a sanctuary designation, could bring limitless, as long as their property value has declined, they could bring unlimited requests for property value refunds because of the decline in their property value and the fact that they've met one of the two criteria set.
Up to their, it's not beyond their tax liability, but up to their tax liability, if they can show that their value of their property has been diminished because their local government chose to be a sanctuary city, then yes, up to their tax liability, but does not go beyond their tax liability.
And that's my issue with the bill, is that it's so broad in its scope that anyone, we could literally inundate cities, sanctuary city designation or panhandling, loitering, public urination, public consumption of alcohol beverages. These are things that happen across the state. And so as long as my property value has declined and someone has had a beer publicly by my home.
No, if your local government is not enforcing the law, just because someone has a beer next to your home doesn't mean that your local government's not enforcing the law. What this says is if your local government has a practice or a policy of not enforcing the law, that's where this would apply. So it's a real simple way to ensure that your local government isn't inundated with requests is follow the law.
And one last question, Mr. Chair, and that that would be subject to whose interpretation in terms of a municipality enforcing the law or not?
So
Who decides that?
So the local government sets up a conference, is how the law defines it, under the code section 48.5.380, which is on line 44. Local government gets to determine what process this would move through, whether they wanted to refer it to a department or whether they want to move it through the county commission or city council. But any decision they make would be appealable to the Superior Court. But ultimately, at the first level, the local government gets to set up a process for dealing with these sort of decisions. I don't know.
All right.
Sounds like
We're going to go over to Mr. Norman. Go ahead.
Just to build on what Rep. Gaines was getting at with the policy and patterns language, put another way, it applies to localities that systematically, routinely, and persistently refuse to enforce these laws. And as a property owner, when that occurs, and your property is diminished, your property value is diminished as a result, that's whenever you're material impacted.
So, I mean, I live in the city of Atlanta, and, panhandling has been around as, the enforceability of what you're trying to achieve, to me, it feels more like a fool's errand than a common sense substantive measure to get at the root of this problem. If we're talking about property, just drops in property value, and we want to get to the root of it, let's talk about the root causes of that. I just don't see how this measure is actually moving the needle to accomplish that. Public consumption of beers, all of these things happen across the board.
Again, it
across
only applies in cities and counties where the local government is not actually enforcing the law. So if they it's on line 21, where a government follows a policy, pattern, or practice of declining to enforce existing laws, ordinances, or resolutions, it's not because one person is panhandling and the local, one local officer does not address that issue. Also, there actually is not a state law on panhandling, so it's up to the local government. If they have that on the books, they need to enforce it.
Yeah. I'm just simply saying that the presence of these activities, the persistent presence of these activities, which we could find in many places across the state, would fall within that definition that you just provided. So
if you know of local governments that are actively declining to enforce the law, then absolutely they would apply.
But
all right, we're going to move on. Rep. Gaines, I was speaking with a manager of apartment complexes recently, and he was telling me that it takes as long as 180 days sometimes to get a person out that's just showed up, maybe paid rent for 1 month or less, but then refuses to get out. And it's taken sometimes 6 months or longer to get them out. Is this does this bill apply in that situation at all?
I don't think it would apply.
Okay.
To be honest.
Chairman Saines?
Thank you, Chairman Gaines. I do have a couple of questions. It's a new subject for me because where I'm from, our local governments enforce the laws we have, which seems like the easiest solution as you
You're
identified.
lucky.
Can you hear me? And just for clarification purposes, in terms of the pattern of behavior you're describing, there's 3 categories that would initiate this from being an available tool for a local taxpayer, and that is the first one starting in line 23 with public campaigning and ending in the substances in 25, and then the sanctuary city provision from 25 to 27, and then the notification provision from line 27 to 28, right? So in terms of addressing the root of the problem, I agree. I want to tackle the first category, but in the second two categories, the problem addressed here is local government inaction, and it's simply giving a remedy to a taxpayer. We're not doing anything for local elected officials to decide what they should or should not do. We're simply making sure that if a taxpayer is caught in a situation like that, they're taking up a government responsibility of, let's say, in an apartment complex, cleaning up loitering or panhandling in their property that's repeatedly not enforced by local policy. That local officials chose to indicate they simply have a remedy to compensate for that government inaction that they are having to do themselves.
That's right.
Thank you.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you. I've actually kind of right off part of what Representative Sain said. To me, my experience, if you want to get government's attention and start playing with its wallet.
That's right.
And so when I see citizens who are not being served by their local government, I've consistently tried to give out other opportunities or venues to get out of that. But in this case, this is the one chance where you can come in and say, hey, this is diminished my value. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. So I think it's a great bill, and I appreciate you bringing it. That's
Thank you.
really all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Oliver, you number 24.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
This bill was introduced when, and the substitute was produced when?
The bill was introduced last week, and the substitute, I believe it should be on your desk.
So it's produced today.
Sometime today, this morning.
And the provision that's added in the substitute is the provision about your consolidated city county not calling the feds that they had an undocumented person in their jail. Is that what has been added in the substitute?
That's one of the things added, but there were other components added as well.
And so you want to bring attention to the tragedy in Athens?
No.
How many people at a tailgating in Athens are publicly drunk?
I don't know the answer to that.
Would it be a pattern that there are publicly drunk people at a tailgate at a football game in Athens?
If the local, well, actually, I think UGA PD and ACC PD work pretty diligently on that issue during game days. So
you don't think there are any publicly drunk people at a tailgating in Athens on game day?
I didn't say that. I said the UGA PD and ACC PD, they're definitely enforcing the law as best they can.
Gentleman next to you didn't identify himself, but he used words about systematically and persistently that are not in the bill. And I wondered if that is your intent, to apply a systematic, intentional standard to the law, or whether you want us just to believe that your county government is systematically and persistently not obeying the law.
So are you trying to change that? What?
I just want to know what you think a pattern is. You don't think a pattern of not arresting drunk people at tailgating exists. What is a pattern defined by law of refusing to cite public drunkenness? What's a pattern?
When a local government makes a decision to simply not enforce the laws that it has, that is a pattern, or if it could be a policy.
What you just
practice.
stated was a policy. I'm focusing on what's a pattern.
I think when it's obvious. So I'll give you an example. Just that, like on the enforcement of Code Section 42.414, which is your question a moment ago about notifying the feds if you have someone in the jail who has been there illegally. I don't know that it's actually state law, as you know, and I believe it's policy of every sheriff's office to make that report. But there are counties that have a pattern of not doing that.
Do you know that Clark County has a written policy in relation to that, what you just asserted?
They do have a written policy to do it, but have not followed it.
So they don't have a written policy to avoid doing it. They have a written policy to avoid.
They have a pattern of not doing it.
How do you define the pattern? 1 in 10, 1 in 20? I'm just trying to figure out if there's any
By
legal
consistently not doing it.
consistency to this political idea you're putting forward.
By consistently not enforcing the law.
Consistently isn't in the statute, by the way, I don't believe, that you've drawn here for
Well, if
you.
you wanna
Your
add
f-
it,
Your friend says systematically, and I'm just kind of curious about what the standard of law might be.
Well, maybe if you think it'd be appropriate under pattern, you could add, systematic pattern, if that would satisfy your concerns.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds
All
like
right.
an easy change.
Let's go to Representative Anulowicz.
Thank you. So when you're presenting this bill, one of the things that came to my mind initially has to do with the sterogenics issue, the ethylene oxide issue that we had in Cobb County came to light in 2020. I actually own property that's within 0.8 of a mile of that, and I was very dismayed when the then chair of the Cobb County Commission unilaterally decided that they were going to go ahead and reduce property values, thinking it was going to be a great thing to do a favor for the property owners there to reduce their property values, when in fact no comps, no FMLS, nothing indicated that property values were in fact decreasing. In fact, they have continued to increase. And I guess that leads to my question, which is, where are the realtors in this? And where are you getting, you talk about in the definitions of fair market value. Is that determined by FMLS? Is that determined by comps? How is that determined? And have the realtors given any input to what it could mean if all of a sudden you have, somewhat arbitrarily, property values being diminished for all of the other people who may or may not think there's a problem with public defecation, but they're awfully concerned that they may lose value of their biggest investment because their neighbor has decided they want to go after the DA.
So I'm assuming you were talking about your assessment of your home value was what was lowered in Cobb, or what?
It was, and then it
The
wasn't
assessment,
because
though.
okay,
it was. You said value. I just
yeah,
wanna
it was
make
the
sure.
assessment based on the value, and
Okay.
you're talking about the value, and I understand that there is a difference.
No, I just want to make, because
Yeah.
in this bill to be clear, does not change the assessment of the property. This
doesn't-
would be a refund on the property tax, but it does not change the assessment. To
So it's a
clarify.
refund on the property tax, but it doesn't change the assessment. But you would have to get this refund on the property tax if you, as a property owner, can demonstrate that your property has decreased in value,
Or if you've had to incur expenses like cameras,
like a Ring
fencing.
camera.
That's right.
So like the $39 or whatever it is. So, but I guess I'm just trying to get to, what does this mean for a community? Because this is not. So you're saying that there's no decrease in assessment. So this is just a property owner then deciding that their property value has decreased. So then I guess that's my question. What are the perhaps unintended consequences for a subdivision, perhaps, if a couple people in there decide they have a problem with the DA not enforcing public defecation or public intoxication rules, and so then they want a refund? So then how, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how this would not potentially have the consequence of lowering all of the property values in this community, so that you have a whole subdivision
But it
that
doesn't.
they've lost
It doesn't
property
affect.
value.
It doesn't affect their assessments. And
It doesn't affect
also,
their assessment, but you're saying it affects the value of their home, right? So when
If-
they go
if
to
they-
sell their
no,
home, they would
no.
sell it for less.
If they believe it impacted the value of their home, and they can prove that there was a diminished value because of an action or inaction of their local government, then they would be eligible to seek the tax refund.
And how?
They as a citizen, would take it forward to the whatever mechanism that the local government sets up to have these complaints adjudicated. They would go forward and say, my home value has been diminished, or my business value has been diminished because of what our local government has done, and then they could seek the tax refund based on that.
So does their home value, or does their home value not have to do with the comps in their area?
Their home value would have to decrease for them to be eligible to have that component of the bill. The other is obviously, again, if they had cameras or incurred a reasonable expense.
So have the realtors weighed in on this, though? Because it does seem like there could potentially, I guess
I honestly don't see the line of questioning, if I'm being totally honest.
Well,
on this one.
the line of questioning is, if you're saying, if my neighbor says that their home value has decreased, I kind of thought the way that
they
works
have to
is
prove
then,
that it has.
So, and how do they do that? Do they have to provide other real estate comparable sales? How are they doing that? That's why I figured the realtors should probably be involved in this conversation in addition to the Goldwater Institute.
So, yeah, so lines 14 through 16 defines fair market value, or 14 through 18 defines fair market value. And so, yes, I mean, you would have to show comps. So you'd have to show, I mean, some of that would be on when you go to the conference with your local government, how you as a taxpayer are proving that there's a loss of value in your property.
Are there any communities that have had a loss in property values, similar because of the reasons that you're sort of using as the impetus for this legislation?
For example, I would think, that, plenty of it. I mean, I don't want to refer back to just what's happened in Athens over the last 72 hours, but frankly, that's all I can think about these days because I think it's the most important issue in our state. But, the apartment complex where this individual lived, and frankly, there's, as I understand it, there, him and his brother, who were both in the country illegally, certainly property values around there, I suspect, are going to decline.
You suspect, but there's no...
They would have to prove that.
And that would be the property value for who? The apartment owner, which is like a hedge fund somewhere?
It's not owned by a hedge fund.
I guess I think this is very, very vague. And I don't... there are some lawyers who have that saying, bad government is good business, and I feel like this would be good business for a lot of lawyers. So that's all.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Chairman, the author, just a quick question: if you may be amenable to a small amendment at the
Sure.
appropriate time that would strengthen lines 27 through 28. You say, or if the local governing body fails to comply with Code Section 42-4-14, which is the reporting of individuals that should not be here when they're incarcerated. Consider the possibility of adding after governing body or sheriff. And the reason I say that, governing body typically is going to be your county commission or whatever the governing body of the combined community is. The sheriff is who is in charge of the jail, the local jail.
I think that's a good change. Thank you.
Chair Saines.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Gaines, would you think it's a pretty common sense thing to say that if a local government clears up issues of loitering, panhandling, public urination, defecacy, public consumption of alcohol beverages or illegal substances, would property values raise if those issues were taken care of?
I would certainly think so.
I don't think there'd be a single person. I don't think I need a real estate association to tell me that. So I don't see where the issue is or the lack of clarity on its effect to private property values on the opposite end.
I wouldn't understand that line of question either, I'll be honest.
And is it not true that while there's some folks who have issue with, I guess, the judgment calls in here, you're creating a structure that gives two parties the ability to remedy their grievances. And yes, every circumstance that grievance might indicate is not captured in the bill because that's not the way an adjudication, I know it to work, that this is simply creating a channel to have that conversation and an ability for a taxpayer to remedy a clear failure of some local governments to ensure safety, security, and prosperity for their local area.
It would, and again, it goes, the local government gets to determine the process for making these complaints. So they would have the ability to set up a way for taxpayers to have those complaints related to sections or to lines 29 to 34, heard. And then if a citizen disagrees with that decision, then they could appeal it to the Superior Court. Anyway, to me, it seems very reasonable. So,
thank you.
Thank you. I believe I've heard of businesses that have had to hire, their own private security guards to enforce.
Oh, in Athens,
what
it's
this,
all the time. Absolutely, you've got. I've talked to some of our hotel owners in downtown Athens that they're spending a fortune on private security because the local government's
government's failing
right.
to enforce their own
That's
policy. Right. All right, let's go to Representative Gullett.
Just along those lines, it made me think of exactly what you're talking about, businesses doing this. I know gas stations, for instance, when cities or counties are telling the police not to respond to whatever type of calls, how much they have to spend for private security, for store redesigns, for locks on the different security measures they have to go through. So I think this is not just a residential side of it, there's a commercial side of it too, that this applies to. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think there's maybe even some folks here in the commercial space that could speak to that.
All right, let's see. Representative Bernal has been pitching over there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I have a great relationship with my police department here in Clayton County. But one of the statements that you just made was as best they can. So how do we determine if a city or municipality is not enforcing the laws? Because there's nothing that says, I mean, how do we determine that? I mean, is there a measurement, like they have so many of alcoholic beverages, so much trash? I mean, how do we determine these things? How would they determine?
I think I answered that a little bit earlier. I know Brian wanted to comment on that, so I'll let him.
Okay.
So if a taxpayer,
I think Representative Oliver would like Mr. Norman to introduce himself.
Yes, ma'am.
I believe we mentioned. Yeah,
my name is Brian Norman. I'm the Director of State Affairs at the Goldwater Institute. I am a registered lobbyist, yes. Goldwater Institute. Yes, ma'am.
Barry Goldwater?
Yes, ma'am, Barry Goldwater. So I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Okay, what I want to know is from this bill, if we're saying that the cities, they're not doing what they're supposed to, how do we measure, how is this going to be measured? I mean, are we going to go and see how many people had alcoholic beverages, illegal substances? I mean, how do we know that they're not enforcing it? How do we know, how can we determine that a city? Because I'll tell you one reason, as one of my Representative Oliver said, every Saturday during football season at UGA, all of these things happen. And so it was said that they're trying their best. They do as best they can. So I don't know how as best they can apply for UGA football games, but then these cities, because these police officers are also doing the best that they can.
Yes, ma'am. So in terms of how the burden of proof works in this situation, is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes.
Okay. So in the situation you reference with a UGA football game, generally speaking, I would say tailgating doesn't diminish property values.
Oh, it can if they're violent or they have fights.
Well, and then it would be on you, the taxpayer, to prove that that violence and those fights diminished the fair market value of your piece of property, or you've taken action to mitigate the harms associated with those fights at those tailgates. As for, would you like to?
Well, the only other thing that, I've just been sitting here thinking, I know Representative Oliver asked a question, now this same question. Again, this is a mechanism that local governments would set up to render these decisions, and then would be appealable to the Superior Court. So the courts would ultimately decide on these issues of, if a court's not going to uphold if it's just some tailgating that, is an issue. But if there's a clear pattern of not enforcing laws, I do think that the courts would uphold it. So I think, that's in the way that this is drafted, where there's the first level that would go through a conference set up by the local government, and then it could be appealed to the Superior Court. I think that I have full confidence in that approach to where the local government and the Superior Courts would be able to render those decisions.
Okay, but well, I guess I don't understand. But you're telling me I'm gonna lose money. I'm gonna pay somebody back, but now I've got to decide at the same time, I've got to decide if whoever it is not enforcing the law, and then I've got to set up all the regulations and everything, and then I guess we go to level 2, and then we go to Superior Court. I mean, we're coming up with this. We're first of all saying that if they're not doing their job. So how is the person who's not doing their job is also going to be govern themselves if they're not doing their job? Because that's, I mean, actually, you know, this is the third time for this bill. I think we should lay this on the table and maybe come back, because this is not clear, and we keep trying to solve a problem, but we don't have any real answers for it. And then also in the jail, I mean, what is the time frame that they have to report who's in there? Because there's nothing that says, okay, if I arrest 30 people within 48 hours, I need to say if they're American citizens or if they
So
came
that's-
from Mars. I mean, where is all that
that's
at?
already spelled out in code section today. That's,
Okay, but does it give a time frame? Because you're saying if they don't do this, they're
No.
not. So does it? Okay,
They're-
so then we have to be more specific
it's
and
while
say.
they're in the jail, but that's
Okay.
a whole separate code section. But this
But
references that.
you brought it up though, so I assume.
But what I'm saying is I'm not changing current law on that, and it's already the law that sheriffs have to comply with.
But is it
that.
within a period of time?
No.
Okay. So
It's
then
while
how
they're
could that
in-
be a
while they're
violation?
detained.
How could that be a violation? I'm just trying to understand.
Sorry, I'm
All right, we have a lot of lights blinking here, and we have some public
apologize. There was a lot
testimony
of
too.
conversation over here. I was hearing about 10 different people talking at one time.
Yeah. So let's see, Representative Gullett, what number are you? 28.
28. Yeah, just at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
All right. What was your?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is an emotional and intentionally divisive issue, and I'd like to call the question. I believe that takes priority over motions.
You'd like to call what question?
Question on this bill. I'd like to call the question of a vote on this bill.
Okay. All right. Any more discussion? I think we had a proposed amendment.
Mr.
right.
Chairman, I do so because this is obviously getting more heated. Maybe it's just the normal tension that is brought to this body at this time of day. Maybe it's because of the tragedy that we're talking about insistently in a political room. But I'd like to move, you can accept whatever motion you wish, to move that the bill be tabled or move that the vote be called.
All right. I believe Representative Gullett wants to make a motion.
Do pass.
All right. We have a do pass. Do we have a second? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
All right. We'll do a show of hands. All in favor, say aye. All right. All opposed. All right. And so now we will. The bill passed. All right. Thank you, Representative. All right. Chair Blackman, you have House Bill 426. Chair Blackman, do you want to present from your chair? All right, number 27. So House Bill 426 passed out of this committee last year, and Chair Blackman's going to present it again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Working off of LC 472328S, and it is in the exact same form that passed last session. I'm guessing there hasn't been a lot of changes on opinions to this. But we went through several iterations, and this is in the most acceptable form. It provides that certain election documents are subject to open records. It removes the legal seal, provides preservation language, and it sees rules and regs to the state election board with some specific instructions. Just to keep this brief, in general, it really further ensures that we have citizen-run elections, that we have maximum transparency, and we have public verification. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman.
All right, and we did pass this out last year, correct?
In the exact same form, yes.
In the
sir,
exact same form, so nothing's changed. Do we have any questions from the committee? I don't see any. So, do we have a motion? Make a motion. All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. No. All right, it moves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Members of the committee.
All right, we have one more, and this is House Bill 625 that we've heard before. Come on up, Representative Mathis and Wade. This one has, we've got a sub. This has been worked on. And go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I just appreciate you hearing this substitute on House Bill 625. We've been dealing with this for a couple of years here, and I brought in a good help this time and hope we can get it across the finish line here. So at this time, if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to Floor Leader Will Wade. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny, and thank you, Chairman and colleagues. I'll keep this brief. I know the hour is late. This has been heard before in a subcommittee, and we took the feedback from the parties at the Coroner Association as well as the ACCG, and we have made a lot of, I guess we've covered a lot of runway with all those parties to get to a place where we agree on, I think, the majority of the bill. I know that ACCG may want to clarify some of their, I guess, nuanced concerns, but I want to address just basically what this bill is doing. I've been working on this bill now 3 years. My predecessor, Kevin Tanner, started this under some direction from former Speaker Ralston. It's been 33 years since the coroner pay schedule has been addressed by the General Assembly. A lot has transpired in that time. Our state has grown enormously in that period of time, and we feel like this is the appropriate time to bring that. And ACCG, I want to personally thank them for their efforts to help us work out the minimum salary schedule. Again, this is a minimum salary schedule for coroners in Georgia. This does not minimize the opportunity for counties to exceed this. This will just help set a standard to reflect the commitment that coroners and their deputies have in this state, being a 365, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day role. The other changes that we've made is to reflect that if you are in a county that has a minimum of 75 or more cases, that you would, as a county commission, offer the coroner a full-time benefits like any other local elected official that does the same 2,080 hours a year in work. And it would give the opportunity that they could or may offer that to any deputy coroner if that county saw fit. It's not a mandate, it's an option. We also are going to reflect the times. We are increasing the per diems for actual case fees to be commensurate with today's market of $250 per case. And the other area where the ACCG, we are still discussing and negotiating. There are some commissioners that are in favor of this. There are some that are not. So I'm certain that they will say that they are not necessarily in favor of this, and that is recognizing the call time that our deputy coroners have to take. And that is setting aside family time, weekends, vacations, birthdays, etc., in which they may or may not get a case. And what this bill does is says that they would have $100 per diem if they are on call but do not have a case. If they get a case, then they forego the per diem and they would only get the case fee. And it would be capped at 90 days a year. My rationale for 90-day cap, I would say in some counties there are deputies that work more than 90 days. There are 52 weeks in a year. If you look at just a Saturday and Sunday, multiply that out times 2, that's more than 100. But I do want to acknowledge that I'm not trying to push down an undue burden on counties to pay more than they think that they can manage. And that's the summary of the changes that we've come up through the past year of working with those organizations. Appreciate any questions and your favorable consideration. Thank you.
All right. So appreciate your work on it. And do we have any questions? Looks like I see one over here. Is this Chairman Deloach?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there currently some minimum requirements for paying coroners in the state now?
They are. If you look at, just to clarify, in lines 49 through 66, what we've done is we've acknowledged a new pay scale. So we're changing it from what used to be when rural Georgia was considered 35,000 or less. We've updated that to reflect in lines 53 through 66 to be more commensurate with that, what's actually happening. Most of the counties are complying with this. Not to throw any counties under the bus, but there's about 7 to 9 that are a little bit outside of it, complying with existing law. ACCG and Coroner Association have agreed to work together to communicate with those counties regarding compliance with existing law, and should this pass, to comply with the new standards that are here. But most
Mr. Chairman,
counties
if I
are
might,
here.
one more very, very quickly. Would you say it's fairly common practice in Georgia for us to mandate minimum salaries for sheriffs and clerks and tax collectors? And so this is not something unusual to have this minimum requirement for coroners. We're not singling them out.
That is correct. We're actually finally, in my opinion, having the opportunity to recognize the job that they do, like those other elected officials that you referenced that are on current state minimum salary schedules.
All right. Representative Bernal, I know you got your light on. ACCG's here, and I wonder if do you want them to?
I have no issue that they work together if they want to share their what they support and what they still have some local concerns with. That's fine.
All right, Mr. Edwards, if you want to come up to the podium, I'll turn the mic on there, and once we hear from him, I'll get to Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Todd Edwards with ACCG. I know this bill's been before you the past several years. At the current time, ACCG is not in a position to support this bill. We do appreciate and have worked with Representative Wade, Mr. Mathis, or Representative Mathis, others. I'll keep it short. The question was asked, is it normal in state law to set minimal salaries of state elected officials? Yes, it is. They had it for all the constitutional officers up until now. They've had it for coroners up to a population of 34,999. What's most concerning to ACCG in this bill is it takes it one step further and guarantees pays for deputy coroners, non-elected, and in no other case can I cite in state law where deputy sheriffs, deputy anyone else gets it. And that is one of the biggest concerns. And we've talked it out about changing the law where it's paying them, because they're on call not to work. The main issue that we have is not that coroners deserve more pay, not that deputies do. It's no one's good, no one's bad. It's that currently in state law, you as a legislative body through local act have the authority to raise these salaries, as do local governments. They currently do. The biggest concern when you go statewide is the systems that it's going to require of Georgia counties, and it's going to be dependent whether or not they're paying a lot more, how much in this bill, based on what the salary is listed here for the coroners themselves, going back to coroners, and it all depends on the caseload and how many deputies you have. And if we're requiring, going back to the deputies now, that they get paid for not working, if you have 5 deputy coroners, because you don't want someone to be on call all the time, then you put in this requirement, which would be up, the earlier one, up to $9,000 a year plus case fee. They're going to be concerned, may want to reduce it. That may, in fact, have the opposite effect of what the intention is. And they'll say, well, let's get rid of those. So we're not denying there's issues. There could be issues with pay. It's currently being handled. A lot of local governments handle supplements. We were asked to work with the author to try to find a salary scale. I think that's fair for the elected officers. We have serious concerns with requiring it for deputies. We would like to keep raise the investigation fee for deputy coroners. And if there's full-time benefits, the provision in there, we wanted to ensure, and I think we're working on it, that if the coroner works full-time, they get full-time benefits. If a deputy works full-time, and I believe it's a May now, then I'll hold my comments on that for the latest sub. But if it's in fact a full-time job, they should get them. If they're working somewhere else full-time, then rely on the county. Let's determine whether or not that goes out. Our counties still have concerns. I think you'll hear about it from them. It's nothing against coroners. We've had a great working relationship. But when I bring it to our policy council, that's the position I'm up here to share with you. I thank you for your time and consideration.
And Mr.
Happy to
Chairman, if
answer
I
any
can just
questions.
respond to a couple of his points.
Yep, go ahead.
I don't disagree that many of the other agencies that Chairman Deloach referenced, we don't spell out deputies, but we also don't have an office in which they're on call 365, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I think this just puts in statute an opportunity to set a minimum standard to what that office is. I also want to remind the committee what you heard last year, which is the world in which we're living. We have a lot of coroners that are I'm going to say this, they are peers of my friend Mr. Deloach, and they are not going to be working a lot longer. 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a huge turnover. We have to reflect the income that families need to start out as a deputy coroner to hope to be a future coroner, and this will also help incentivize for workforce development and attract folks. I appreciate their concerns. I've worked with them, but I think this is a great place for us to land, and we can continue the discussion.
And this would bring some uniformity, if I understand
does.
it right,
Yes,
across
sir.
the state. And currently, there's 159 counties and a lot of different ways the counties are handling the coroner.
That's right. And this only affects coroners, not those jurisdictions that have medical examiners. That's a separate situation. And for those that want to get rid of coroners, the medical examiner office setup and structure is much more expensive than a coroner setup.
Mr. Edwards, did you want to make any more remarks? Or
Well, just as far as the deputy, I respectfully would submit that not everyone's on call 24/7. That's why you have a coroner and your deputies or multiple deputies so that they can go to the ball game, vacation, etc. That's more deputies, the more options there are for someone not to have to be on call at any particular time.
okay, thank you. Representative Bernal.
At the proper time, I move do pass.
All right. We have a question by Chair Saines.
I have two short questions. One for ACCG, if that's the case. I understand you're separating the issue of coroner and deputy coroner. Are you indicating that you're supportive of the pay scale that starts in line 49 for coroners?
We're indicating that we believe it is fair to provide a pay scale. As to the numbers, I mean, that could be debatable, and our members would be split. But we do think that's fair to provide a pay scale. That is something we conceded from last year, as well as raising the death investigation fee. It's the other issues in here that we have concern with.
So the issue you have, just to make sure the point's clear, you're taking you're not taking a supportive stance on the pay scale that starts on line 49. You're taking a no stance on it. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to clarify that. And your issue, is that correct?
You'll have to state that again. I apologize.
You're taking no stance on the pay scale here provided?
It's hard to, let me tell you why. Because some counties, and they're all over the map, y'all stated that, they pay them a flat salary. This may be higher than lower. And then they pay them the investigation fees. I think a pay scale is fair. I don't know that we could agree to these specific numbers, but overall our position would be we can't support it. We have less objection to that than other parts in the bill.
Well, I would be hard pressed. My county would fall into the $45,000. I'd be hard pressed to understand any opposition to a basic salary of $45,000 for a county of 62,000 people. But furthermore, so your issue is with deputy coroners' pay on this bill. I see items in line 32, the $100. The $250 and the $100, 31 and 32. Is there any other items I'm missing?
So it would be, if I may, following that 32 through 34, the per diem for them not taking investigations. That's the largest concern as well. And I believe in the sub you're looking at, and forgive me, I don't have the latest version, it would be on them getting full-time benefits. I would love to strike that language.
I appreciate that. I'm going to take a policy distinction, although I respect
yes, sir.
your distinction here. But for the author, could you walk us through the rationality of having? I understand line 31, $250 for each case worked. I think that's understandable. Yep. And could you clarify the per diem for the days not worked? I get the on call, but kind of how do we go to 100? So that's so if they work 0 cases. That'd be $100. That'd be $3,640, give or take, a year.
Well, it'd be capped at no more than 90 on-call days. So that would be, again, to my reference on if you're in a county like mine that has 2 pretty much regular on-call deputy coroners, they are, in some cases they'll do 24-hour shifts or 48. Sometimes they'll do 12 on, 12 off. I'm not trying to get into those weeds, but when that happens, one may get a call, one may not. That's still time they've got to set aside. And so I'm capping it, in which most cases they're going to have somebody on call, one or two of them, either for a part or an overlay of a day. And if they're on call and they're having to set aside missing high school basketball games, missing, other things. And in the job market that we're in right now, I had a deputy coroner reach out that worked at Home Depot. And he ended up saying that he was asked that, he said, look, we're supportive of you being a deputy coroner, but if we hire you to be on shift from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and you get a call and you choose to leave, you can't do that but so many times, or we're not going to be able to continue to employ you, just because we have to make sure we treat others the same. So it limits those deputy coroners from having other opportunities to earn a living even while they're on call. And I've capped it at 90 days, which is less than the 104 weekends if you counted all those days up.
I appreciate it. I know the hour is late. Is there any limit to what the only, I support this bill, I like this bill, the only issue I could see is, given that we're creating that mechanism, and 3,000 or give or take dollars, I don't think, and that's going to be less with a cap, but is there a limit or a restriction on how many deputy coroners a coroner can name? Or are we creating a mechanism for an unlimited cost here?
I'm gonna lead this to the county commissioner that I trust, former county commissioner Victor Anderson. I think the coroner has to come to the county commission and have his budget approved. Is that correct? And so in order that they're going to justify the need for how many deputy coroners they do through their budget process, and I know county commissioners have the ability to limit through working in that relationship as to how much they're going to budget. So I'll yield to him, but I was told by the county commissioners that I've spoken with about this that they were comfortable with it, and there's some obviously that have differing opinions, but ultimately that budget process can be a governing mechanism to the number of deputy coroners. But again, it's not necessarily the number of deputy coroners you have, it's how many deputy coroners are you covering the number of hours a week or in a total year. You may have one that works every single Sunday 24/7. They're your Sunday deputy coroner, but that's it. You may have some in some communities that are working 3 days in a row, they're on call. You may have some that are 6 hours available. We're not taking that away. They still have to have the budgetary request.
All right. I support the majority of the bill enough to be comfortable supporting it. I know the hour is late, so I'm going to hold, and I thank you for your clarification.
We did have a motion a little earlier. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. All right.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
We're adjourned.